Today's breaking story is not welcome news for the forces in the Trump administration who would like to rule without restraint. As their shock and awe campaign of pushing the envelope of decency under the banner of this is what America voted for, well, as that campaign continues to ramp up, the blowback as well is beginning to gain momentum and attention. Today's Supreme Court blowback, stick around for it. It's a great way to start off this hands-off Resistance Weekend.
Tomorrow, protesters taking part in a day of action. A live look right now over Niagara Square in downtown Buffalo, where we expect a rally to happen Saturday morning, part of a national movement called 50-51 that stands for 50 Protest, 50 States, One Movement. There is also a hands-off protest. This is what is known as, similar to what we saw in Niagara Square earlier this month when demonstrators rallied against the actions of the Trump administration. The protesters expected to gather there at 11 tomorrow morning.
Well, hands off. It seems it's all the rage, right? Well, before we see today's Supreme Court example of that, let's enjoy an earlier judicial hands-off. Comes from CNN's Caitlin Polance on Friday. She highlighted federal judges' sharp warning to the Trump administration this week as officials defy a Supreme Court order regarding the return of Kilmar Abrego Garcia to the United States. This is absolutely great. You got to check out the language real quick from a Reagan-appointed conservative judge. And of course, on the other side of this, we'll have today's breaking ruling from the Supreme Court that says hands off Trump for now.
Senator Chris Van Hollen's photo of him and Kilmar Abrego Garcia. Senator Van Hollen of Maryland looked like a fool yesterday, standing in El Salvador, begging for attention from the fake news media. Caitlin Polance is joining us now from Washington with more. You're really looking at the legal aspect of all of this, because whether or not Trump and what he says about Van Hollen and all of that, it is the courts that have some power here. And this message from the Court of Appeals, this order, is quite surprising. Tell us what it says.
Sarah, I've never read anything like this from an appeals court before. The political conversation is about Abrego Garcia and what is happening with him in El Salvador. In court, there are technical procedures that are happening now about what the U.S. is doing to facilitate his return to the United States after the Trump administration openly is admitting that he was mistakenly sent to that prison. He should not have been sent to El Salvador. And they are being asked daily what is being done to facilitate his return. What the court is saying now, this court is the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals, overseeing the courts not just in Maryland, but in much of the South of the United States. What that court is saying is that it appears the administration is doing nothing to facilitate Abrego Garcia's return, and the way that they are behaving in this case appears to signal a crumbling of American democracy. Judge J. Harvey Wilkinson, one of the longest-serving appellate judges in the United States, a renowned conservative judge, he wrote 7 pages yesterday about this, imploring the executive branch to listen to the courts, to uphold the rule of law, and to follow the Constitution in a way that preserves American democracy before it is too late. He writes, while there is still time. This is more of what the judge wrote in his order. If today the executive claims the right to deport without due process and in disregard of court orders, what assurance will there be tomorrow that it will not deport American citizens and then disclaim responsibility to bring them home? And what assurance shall there be that the executive will not train its broad discretionary powers upon its political enemies? This is the starkest warning that we have ever seen, really, from a federal appellate court, a conservative judge, toward the executive branch today in this case, but much bigger issues at play. Sarah?
Yeah, that is some very strong wording and unmistakable a warning to the Trump administration. Caitlin Polance, thank you so much for your great reporting there. Kate?
Yeah, wow, bigger issues indeed. Well, today, in fact, these become supreme issues. As our breaking story reveals, it comes from NBC News just hours ago. The Supreme Court in the early hours of Saturday told the Trump administration not to take any action to deport Venezuelan men based in Texas it alleges are gang members. The court did not grant or deny an application filed by lawyers for the detainees, but effectively hit pause on the case, which affects people currently held within the jurisdiction of the Northern District of Texas. The government is directed not to remove any member of the putative class of detainees from the United States until further order of this court, the brief order said. Two conservative justices, Clarence Thomas and Samuel Alito, disagreed with the Supreme Court decision, the order noted. At around the same time, the New Orleans-based Fifth U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals rejected a request by the alleged gang members to halt any deportation under a wartime law called the Alien Enemies Act. On Friday afternoon, at least one charter bus rolled up to the Blue Bonnet Detention Center in Anson, Texas, a town about 200 miles west of Dallas, where the men are being held. Administration officials are seeking to deport the men, who they say are members of the Tren de Aragua gang. There are major questions about whether the government has the authority to apply the Alien Enemies Act to gang members outside of a war situation, and whether adjudications about gang memberships are accurate. The plaintiffs ask only that this court preserve the status quo so that proposed class members will not be sent to a notorious prison in El Salvador before the American judicial system can afford them due process. Their lawyers at the American Civil Liberties Union wrote in the Supreme Court filing. In the court order, the justices said that the government should file a response to the ACLU application at the Supreme Court as soon as possible. The Supreme Court action follows an April 7th decision in which the court made it clear that any people the government wants to deport under the Alien Enemies Act need to be given the chance to challenge the decision via habeas corpus petitions. The case raises questions not just about Trump's aggressive and unprecedented use of presidential power in invoking the 18th century law, which has been used only when the country was at war, but also about whether his administration is complying with court orders. In this earlier decision, the Supreme Court faulted a judge in Washington for the way he handled the case, but said plaintiffs could sue in the districts in which they are confined. The vote to overturn the lower court was 5-4, with the liberal justices joined in part by conservative Justice Amy Coney Barrett. Litigation continues in a separate case over the Trump administration's mistaken deportation of Kilmar Abrego Garcia to El Salvador. Hey, if you happen to be headed out to any of the hands-off protests around the country, be careful, be peaceful, and post any great moments in our comment section. March with a spring in your step, because courage is contagious. We're all in this together. I think that's how herd immunity works, but frankly, I'd have to check with Bobby.